following stories have been dubbed from real posts on forums and communities that share bizarre and supernatural tales.
Hi everyone. So I've been holding on to this for a while and I don't really have anyone else to talk to about it. I found this forum and I'm hoping maybe someone here has seen some messed up stuff and can, I don't know, tell me I'm not crazy. So, I'm not really a party guy. I'm more of a stay in and play games kind of dude. But there's this girl in my biology class, Maya. She's got this super bright kind of bubbly vibe, always laughing, and her eyes are a really intense shade of green that just, I don't know, they just catch the light in a weird way. I've had a crush on her for months, but I'm too much of a geek to actually talk to her. Anyway, she randomly invited me to this party her friend was throwing, and I was like, yeah, okay, sure, even though I was internally screaming because I had no idea what to do at a party. When I got there, it was a lot. The whole house was just a mass of people. It was a proper rager. The air was thick with the smell of cheap beer and sweat, and the bass from the speakers was so loud it felt like it was rattling my teeth. Red and blue lights were pulsing in the living room, and everyone was either on their phones, taking selfies, or crammed together yelling over the music. Total chaos. I felt so out of my element, so I just kinda melted into a corner by the stairs. I spent the first hour just awkwardly standing there, scrolling through my phone, pretending to be busy. But then this guy, Mark, who I knew from debate club, came over. He was with a group of people I didn't recognize, and they were all laughing at something on a phone screen. He gave me a fist bump and was like, "Dude, you look bored, you gotta get in on this." He convinced me to try a couple of drinks, which I'd never done before. The first one was disgusting, a weird mix of warm vodka and some kind of juice, but the second one hit different. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. The music didn't feel so overwhelming anymore. The pulsating lights weren't so harsh. Everything got a little fuzzy, a little brighter, and I felt this weird, light feeling like I was floating a couple of inches above the floor. I started laughing for no reason, and I actually felt like I was part of the scene. That's when I saw her, Maya. She was standing in the corner of the living room talking to her friend. This other girl from our school, I think her name was Chloe. Maya was wearing this simple black dress that was just a little sparkly, and she was animated, gesturing with her hands, a huge smile on her face. Chloe was just staring, completely absorbed by whatever Maya was saying. But as I watched them, something felt off. The way Maya's green eyes were glowing in the flashing lights, they didn't look happy. They looked empty. They had this flat, dead look, even though her mouth was smiling and she was being all bubbly. It was like two different people. I thought about going over to talk to them, but before I could work up the courage, they started moving. They slipped away from the main crowd and headed toward the kitchen, walking in this slow, deliberate way that made the hair on my arms stand up. They went behind the fridge and I saw them open the basement door, which was tucked away, almost hidden. They went down the steps, and something about the way they moved, slow and deliberate, like sleepwalkers. It made a little alarm bell go off in my buzzed brain. The music was still booming, but all I could hear was the squeak of the hinges as they closed the door behind them. I hesitated for a second, my mind yelling at me that it was a stupid idea. But my curiosity, and maybe the alcohol, won out. I pulled the door open and started slowly making my way down the creaky stairs. It was pitch black, and the air got cold immediately. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the muffled music from upstairs. The creaks from the stairs seemed impossibly loud in the dead silence. When I got to the bottom, I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but the basement was completely empty. Nothing. Just a concrete floor and some storage shelves against the walls. A small dark puddle was on the floor near the far wall, a stain of something unidentifiable. I took a step, and my phone's light danced across a single, rusty tool hanging on the wall. For a second, I thought I'd imagined the whole thing, that I was just too drunk and had a bad case of the party jitters. The music from upstairs was so muffled now it sounded some alien thing. But as I was about to turn around, I felt it. a cold draft, a breath of air that was even colder than the rest of the basement. I held up my phone, my hand shaking, and slowly scanned the back wall. There was a section of the wall that looked different. The concrete was a slightly darker shade, and it looked like there was a seam, a faint line where the wall didn't quite match up. It looked like a hidden door. I pressed my palm against it, and the cold seeped into my fingers, an unnatural chill that felt like it came from the grave. I traced the seam with my fingertips, that cold in my stomach. I finally found a small, almost invisible crack and pushed my finger into it. It was just big enough to get a hold. I pulled, and the entire section of the wall groaned and slid open with a metallic shriek that made me freeze. I found myself in a narrow, claustrophobic passage. I could barely stand up straight. I had to turn my phone's flashlight to its lowest setting because it was bouncing off the walls and making my head spin. I pressed forward, the passage getting even narrower. The air here was stale and smelled of damp earth and something sweet and sickly, like old perfume mixed with rust or something like that. My clothes brushed against the stone walls, and I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged. It felt like the passage was tightening around me, and I swore I could hear a faint scraping sound from ahead, like someone was dragging something. Every step I took, I felt like I was being watched. The passage curved and twisted, and I started to think I was going in circles. But then I saw a light, an orange glow coming from ahead, flickering and dancing. I squeezed through a final opening and found myself in a small circular room. It was lit by maybe a dozen candles, flickering and casting long shadows everywhere. And that's when I saw them. Maya was standing over Chloe. Chloe was lying on the concrete floor, covered by just a blood-red sheet, and she wasn't moving. She just stared up at the ceiling, her eyes wide, completely catatonic. On the other side of the room stood two people who looked just like Maya's parents from the few times I'd seen them at school pickup. They were wearing these dark, heavy-looking robes, and their faces were stone cold. No expression at all. Their skin was an unnatural, waxy pale, and their eyes seemed to glow. Maya was holding an old, rusty dagger. Not just rusty, it had a strange, dark sheen to it, like a layer of dried old blood. As I watched, she slowly raised it, the blade catching the candlelight, a strange, blank expression on her face. It was the same empty stare I had seen at the party. I must have stumbled in my panic because my foot hit something. My flashlight flickered off. It was a pile of shoes, old, dusty shoes, like all kinds. Sneakers, boots, flats, even a tiny pair of children's shoes. They were just stacked up in the corner. They were all worn and dirty with scuff marks and frayed laces, as if they had been tossed there a long time ago, all of them used before. In that second of darkness, the three figures turned their heads at the same time and stared at me. No one said a word. The dagger froze in midair. The parents' cold expressions twisted into a quick, hungry smile that was gone as fast as it appeared. I saw a flicker of green light in Maya's eyes as a deep, guttural whisper echoed in my head. "He is not meant to be here." I scrambled back, tripping and falling over the junk, and somehow made it out of that passage and back into the main party. My mind was racing, but the flight instinct was stronger than anything I've ever felt. I ran, pushed past people, and got the hell out of there without looking back. I couldn't tell my parents. What was I going to say? I was hungover, which means I was drunk and I saw some stuff. The next day, my head was throbbing with a dull ache that made every sound a hammer blow. It wasn't just a hangover. It felt like a part of my brain had been scraped away. I went to school half expecting to see Maya's face on the news, but there was nothing. I spent the entire day looking over my shoulder, jumping at every loud voice, every slamming locker door. Maya wasn't there. When I finally got the courage to ask my bio teacher about her, he just gave me this bland response. "Oh, Maya, her parents decided to move to another town. Maybe something urgent. Such a shame, she was a bright student." His voice was too calm, too normal. It was like he was reading from a script. I felt like I was losing it. I walked the halls searching for some proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. And then I saw her, Chloe. She was at her locker, her back to me, her hair still tied up in that messy bun she had at the party. I walked up to her, my heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. I had so many questions. Who were those people? Why was she there? Was she okay? I opened my mouth to speak, but she turned around and I froze. Her eyes were wide and completely blank, just like in the room. There was no life in them, no emotion. She looked right through me, as if I wasn't there. She didn't say anything. She just closed her locker and walked away, her movements the same way she had moved toward the basement. She walked down the hallway without a glance back, blending in with the other students as if she was just another part of the scenery. I stood there, frozen, the words caught in my throat. I wanted to grab her and scream, "What the hell happened in that basement?" But I couldn't. I admit. I was too afraid to find out. Too afraid to see that same vacant stare, that same empty space behind her eyes, that I had seen in Maya's. I'm too afraid to ever find out what happened to Chloe or what happened to the shoes owners. A few days later, I saw Chloe again. She was happily talking with her friends about something. Like any other normal teenager.
I don't think I've ever really told anyone about this. But maybe it's time. It happened the summer I was 16, at this place called Camp Blackwood. I'm 19 now, and I still think about it all the time. It feels like a story I read somewhere, not something that actually happened to me. But it did. It happened to me. That was the summer my parents sent me away because they thought I was spending too much time on my computer. I admit I was playing a little too much of League. I remember the bus ride there, the pine trees. I remember everything. The bus was old and smelled like gasoline leaking, and with every mile we drove into the wilderness, my phone signal flickered and died. It was a slow, agonizing trip to nowhere. When we finally pulled up to Camp Blackwood, I hated it. There was just bugs and counselors who were a little too cheerful. Some of them borderline creepy. The whole place was old, with cabins that looked like they were a few decades without maintenance, and a lake that was so still and dark it looked like rotting. It was the kind of place where you could feel the quiet, an emptiness that just sat on your chest. But a few days in, I found my people. There was Jules, who was this super loud, bubbly girl from Boston. She had a laugh that could shake the rafters of our cabin, and she was always doing impressions of the counselors. She was all fast-talking energy and confidence, and I immediately felt less awkward around her. Then there was Alex. He was the quiet one. He was into astronomy, and I really believed him. It was a passion, not the kind of thing you say to hit on girls. He had this easy smile, and he was so calm, even when Jules was being a complete goofball. He had this way of looking at you when you spoke, like you were the only person in the world. I had a huge crush on him, instantly. He was a little lanky and awkward, but in a cute way, and his eyes were brown, always seemed to be studying something you couldn't see, like he was looking at the stars even when he was looking at you. Yeah, I'm lame like that. We spent our days doing everything a summer camp is supposed to be, canoeing on the eerie, silent lake, missing every shot at archery, and telling stupid ghost stories around a campfire. Our nights were filled with whispered conversations long after the counselors had said goodnight. Jules, Alex, and I became inseparable in just a couple days. One afternoon, we were hiking through a part of the woods we weren't supposed to be in, and we found an old, moss-covered shed. It was falling apart, with a splintered door hanging off a single hinge, like a horror movie cliché. Etched into the wood were these weird, swirly symbols like twisted vines or something. Right below them, in rough, bad-written letters, someone had carved the Fireflies. Just that. We all laughed, of course. Jules said it was just some kid's lame attempt at a spooky story, and Alex said it was probably some rare algae bloom. But even as we laughed, a part of me felt a cold shiver. The words felt less like a prank and more like a threat. A few days later, the head counselor with the bushy beard told us the legend of Blackwood Lake. He said that once every few years, on the night of the new moon, the fireflies would gather above the water. He said their light wasn't like a normal firefly's. It was a strange, yellowish-green glow that mesmerized anyone who saw it. He told us the local folks said that if you saw the fireflies, you'd never be seen again. Everyone in the cabin was whispering about it for days. The night after his story, Jules, Alex, and I stayed up late, huddled under our blankets on the porch, and she brought it up again. I bet it's a total fake. What do you think, Alex, Algie? He just shrugged, a strange, thoughtful look on his face. Maybe there are just some things you can't explain with science. He said it with a smile, trying so hard to sound cool. 3 days later, late one night, a tiny sliver of a new moon was visible in the sky. I remember that as well. Jules was restless and whispered to us that she wanted to go see if the legend was true. Come on, it's our last chance, she said. Alex just smiled, his eyes twinkling in the dark cabin. It was a stupid idea, but we were 16, so of course we had to do it. We waited until the cabin was quiet, listening to the slow, heavy breathing of the other girls. We met Alex outside. We sneaked out, our bare feet freezing on the dew-covered grass. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and every rustle of leaves sounded like someone walking. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch and twist, and I swore I saw things moving just at the edge of my vision. When we got to the lake, we walked out onto the old wooden pier. It creaked with every step, and the place was so silent, so still, that the noises we were making reverberated everywhere. The lake was a black mirror, and there was nothing. No fireflies, just the sound of crickets and a breeze rustling the trees. Jules let out a frustrated sigh. I knew it was a fake. I'm going back to bed. This is lame. She stomped off, a bit too loudly for a stealthy escape. Alex and I just watched her go, then sat down on the edge of the pier, our legs dangling over the cold water. We talked for what felt like hours about everything and nothing. Our lives, our dreams. Alex told me how his parents were always pushing him to be a doctor, but all he really wanted to do was look at stars. It was really sweet, I swear. He talked about seeing a real nebula someday, and I told him I just wanted to get through high school. I was getting nervous, sitting so close to him in the moonlight. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't from fear anymore. Then, for a moment, the conversation fell silent. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and the air between us felt so thick, so full. And then he leaned in and kissed me. I know it's cheesy to say it, but was like in the movies. It was perfect. It was just us under the silent sky. And it was exactly what I had been waiting for all summer. It was bittersweet too. I was craving for that kiss, for his company, but knew that soon he would be gone miles away from me. I wanted to taste him and savor every second of him. But that's when they started. At first, it was just one. A tiny, faint yellow-green light that popped up from the water's surface, like a spark from a fire that landed on the lake. We both broke apart, staring at it in silent awe. Then another appeared, and another. Soon they were everywhere, 100 tiny points of light, floating just above the water. They weren't fireflies. They weren't buzzing or moving erratically. They just floated, silent and still. We pulled away from each other, our amazement slowly turning into a creeping dread. "It's the fireflies," I whispered, and he just shook his head, his eyes wide, a flicker of fear in them. The lights started to move, slow at first. They began to drift toward the shore, toward us. They were so bright they hurt my eyes, and they hummed with a low, unnatural sound that I could feel in my teeth. An electricity. They began to circle Alex, a slow dance. He was completely still, his eyes locked on the lights, an empty stare I'd only ever seen on a statue. His skin had gone a horrible, unnatural cold. I reached out to touch his arm, and it was like touching a piece of marble. I said his name, but he didn't answer. He just stood up slowly, as if he was in a trance. The lights swirled faster and faster around him. They were no longer tiny points of light. They were merging one another, creating bigger, pulsing lights with a terrible energy. I tried to pull him back, but the light was so intense it burned my eyes. He started walking, not toward the cabin, but directly into the dark woods. The lights swirled around him, a buzzing, blinding cloud of yellow-green. He was just a silhouette now, his body a dark shape against the glow I could barely look at. Then I saw another silhouette. I swear this to you. I saw it with my own eyes. No one told me this. It was a tall and thin thing, and had a head that was too big, oval-shaped. And then another one and another, all standing at the edge of the light, waiting for him. They weren't moving. They were just watching. I stood there, paralyzed by pure, bone-deep terror. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. The light felt like a physical weight, pressing me down. It was almost like sleep paralysis, but wide awake. Suddenly, the light went out. It was just gone. 1 second, it was a blinding, humming vortex, and the next, a complete blackness. I screamed finally and stumbled back to the pier, my hands over my eyes. I scrambled back to the woods, running as fast as I could, but every tree looked the same, and the path seemed to disappear. I called his name, but there was no answer. I couldn't even find where he had disappeared. I just kept running. I got back to the cabin, my lungs burning, and woke up one of the counselors. He was a big, beefy guy who was always telling us to be quiet. I told him everything. I told him about the lights, the silhouettes, and how Alex was gone. He just stared at me for a long, silent moment, his expression showing clear annoyance. "You need to stop with these pranks," he said, his voice hard. "You're waking everyone up. And who is Alex anyway?" I told him again, trying to explain who he was. Maybe he wasn't remembering him. He was a quiet kid after all. But the man just shook his head. "There is no one with that name at the camp. Now get back to your bunk." His eyes held a strange, unsettling glaze, and for a moment I felt like he wasn't just lying, but that he genuinely couldn't see what I was talking about. I went back to bed, confused and terrified. I couldn't sleep. The next day, I woke up with the same sense of unreality. It was like no one had a single memory of him. I went to Jules. "Did you see what happened? With Alex at the lake?" She just looked at me with a blank expression, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Alex? Who's Alex? And what are you talking about? We went to the lake. I was in my bed all night. I never snuck out." Her voice was kind, but her expression was one of total confusion. My heart dropped to my stomach. I walked around the camp that day, and not a single person knew who Alex was. His bunk was someone else's. His name wasn't registered, and his things were gone. He was just gone. I asked a few other campers, but their eyes just glazed over and they shook their heads. It was like he had been erased from reality. And that's it. You can call me a liar or crazy. For a long time I thought I was crazy, but I know what I saw. I have the memory of that kiss, of that feeling that someone existed who understood me. But every time I remember it, I also remember the cold dread of seeing him walk into the darkness. And I can still see those bright, horrible lights whenever I close my eyes. I can still see the silhouettes waiting for him. And I'm still terrified that one day my memory will just vanish and I'll forget him too.
First of all, I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I don't care, okay? I have to put this somewhere. It's been 5 years, and I still can't look at an airplane without feeling my stomach drop. Back then, I was a pretty decent lacrosse player. I'm not saying I was a star or anything, but I was good enough that it got me a scholarship to this fancy prep school. For my parents, who were struggling with money like everyone else, that scholarship was everything. I wasn't playing for glory. I was playing to keep that tuition bill at zero. That season, our team was killer. We made it to the state championships, which meant we had to fly to an away game for the first time. The school covered the plane tickets, and for me, a kid who'd never been on a plane, It was a huge deal. The whole team was buzzing, all of us in our matching school hoodies, laughing and shoving each other. I remember we were all crammed into the waiting area, joking and trying to act cool, but you could tell who there was secretly freaking out about flying for the first time, me included. I remember even my hands shaking as I got my ticket, and walking through the gate felt like passing into a different world. I was so nervous, my mind was a blank slate of pure anxiety. But then I struck gold. When I got to my seat, 17B, there she was, my high school crush, Sarah. She was a cheerleader, and she was so out of my league it wasn't even funny. She had this incredible laugh that would light up the entire room, and her body was amazing. She was just radiant. She looked up from her phone, smiled, and my brain just turned to mush. She gestured to the window seat, and I squeezed past her, my bag bumping her leg. "Nervous?" she asked. Her voice was soft and a little teasing. I just nodded, a complete idiot. She just reached over and took my hand. "It's okay. I can hold your hand for a while. It'll be fine." You can imagine how I was inside. I was so caught up in the moment, I barely felt the plane shuddering as we lifted off the ground. The world outside the window shrank and tilted, but all I could focus on was the feel of her hand in mine, and trying to will my body not to sweat. For the next 2 hours, we just talked. We talked about school, about our families, about what we wanted to do with our lives. I learned what she wanted to be, and she told me about her 2 younger sisters who were constantly stealing her clothes. I told her I just wanted to keep playing lacrosse, to keep my scholarship so my parents wouldn't have to worry. We laughed and shared stories, and the air between us felt electric. I couldn't stop looking at her. The way the light from the window caught her eyes, the way her lips curved when she smiled. The feeling was 1,000 times more intoxicating than any victory on the lacrosse field. We started playing a game of 2 truths and a lie, and when it was her turn, she leaned in close. Her breath smelled mint. "One of these is the truth," she whispered. "I'm going to follow my dream of becoming an architect. I'm terrified of flying too." She paused to think a little. "My name is Sarah." I laughed, my heart pounding, and guessed the lie was that she was terrified of flying. She just smiled. And then, at some point, the talking stopped. She leaned in, her lips finding mine. It was a messy, awkward kiss, but it was everything. It was the moment I had been waiting for all my life. The moment I knew I had a chance with the most amazing girl in the world. And that's when she pulled back, her voice a soft, low whisper in my ear. "Follow me to the bathroom. Give me a minute, then come." My legs were trembling, not from nervousness anymore. My mind was racing with every fantasy I had ever had. I gave her a minute, then another, the longest 2 minutes of my life. My heart was pounding in my ears. I stood up, trying to look casual, and walked down the narrow aisle. When I got to the back of the plane, I found the lavatory door she had just closed. My breath hitched. I was finally going to do it. I knocked on the door. No response. I tried again, a bit louder this time. Nothing. Maybe she didn't hear me over the hum of the engines. I gently pushed on the door, and it swung open. It was empty. My heart sank. Maybe I misunderstood her. Maybe it was a prank. It would make sense. The cruel, hilarious kind of joke a popular girl would play on an awkward jock. I felt a hot wave of embarrassment wash over me. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went inside and locked the door, telling myself I'd wait a minute, cool off, and then go back to my seat. The door clicked shut, and the room was suddenly tiny, claustrophobic. I stood there, waiting. Time stretched on. 5 minutes went by. 10. It had to be a prank. I sighed, feeling defeated, and reached for the lock. It wouldn't turn. My heart skipped a beat. I tried again, but it was stuck. I started to panic. I pulled, I pushed, I banged on the door with my fists. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" No one responded. The low buzz of the engine seemed to get louder, creeping in my ears. I don't know. And I could feel the vibrations in my bones. Then the lights flickered and went out completely. I was into total darkness, the only light the faint green glow of the exit sign above the door. A cold sweat broke out all over my body, and then I heard it. A whisper right beside my ear. "Why did you follow?" It was a child's voice, high and thin, but kinda robotic. I spun around, my back hitting the cold plastic wall. I squeezed my eyes shut, wanting to believe it was my imagination, a byproduct of the panic. But when I opened them, I saw her, in the reflection of the small, grimy mirror above the sink. A face, pale and distorted, with large black eyes and a wide, unnatural smile. Just like Sarah's, but something else. The whispers began to multiply all around me, coming from the walls, from the floor, from the sink. "Why did you come here?" they hissed. "This place is not for you." The walls began to shrink. The space around me was getting smaller, and I had to bend my knees, then squat, then curl into a ball. The plastic walls groaned and cracked with the pressure, a terrifying sound like splintering bone. My lungs were screaming, and I felt the air being squeezed out of me. I screamed and screamed, but the sound was choked by the shrinking walls. The figure in the mirror was still there somehow, smiling, its grotesque face shifting and twisting until it looked exactly like Sarah. The pressure was unbearable, my bones grinding, my muscles tearing. I felt like a bug being crushed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was trapped, with the image of her face staring back at me. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my teeth together, a single tear escaping. I was going to die in a tiny bathroom on a plane, crushed to death by walls that didn't exist. The cracking sound intensified, and I felt something give in my shoulder. My arm was pinned, my ribs were screaming, and I could feel the cold plastic of the wall against my cheek. I tried to scream again, but it came out as a whimper. I was on the brink of snapping, of losing my mind completely. Just as the walls touched my chest, just as I thought I would be flattened, it stopped. The pressure held, a terrible, agonizing weight that didn't move. I was locked in that position, unable to move, unable to breathe. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. A bright light sliced through the darkness. The small space was now the size of a regular airplane lavatory. A hand was on my shoulder, shaking me. I opened my eyes, disoriented and gasping for breath, and saw my lacrosse coach staring down at me, his face etched with concern. "Are you okay, son? What the hell was all that screaming?" I was on the floor in a fetal position, my entire body soaked in sweat. The coach helped me up, and I stumbled out of the bathroom. Every single person on the plane was looking at me, some with concern, most with a horrified curiosity. I looked down the aisle to my seat. It was empty. "Where is she?" I asked my coach. "Sarah." He looked confused. "What? That seat's been empty the whole flight. You've been alone since we took off. Sarah is over there." He pointed across the aisle, and sure enough, there was Sarah, sitting next to a girl named Jessica, scrolling through her phone. I stared at her, and she looked up and smiled a quick, polite smile, like she was embarrassed for me, but also scared of the creepy guy screaming in the plane. The smile was real, but it was just a regular smile, not the one that had lit up her entire face. She didn't have a clue who I was. I was so out of it, I just went back to my seat, staring at the empty space beside me. After the incident, the school flew my parents out, and the principal suggested I seek professional help. They didn't get it. They saw a kid who had a panic attack, a claustrophobic episode. They didn't see the whispers or the face in the mirror. For the rest of the trip, I couldn't sleep. I was replaying every moment in my head. The way she had taken my hand, the way she had kissed me, and that final lie. Back at school, the whispers started. Did you hear what happened to him on the plane? He had a nervous breakdown. My teammates tried to be cool about it, but their pity was worse than any joke. I couldn't face them. I couldn't face myself. I tried going to practice a week later, but the moment I stepped onto the field, the open space felt wrong. A field that used to be a place of freedom now felt like a cage, with 100 invisible walls closing in on me. The thought of getting into a scrum, of being surrounded, made my chest tighten. I couldn't hold the lacrosse stick anymore. It felt heavy and foreign in my hand. The joy was gone. The reason I played, to keep my scholarship, was gone. The feeling of being trapped, the horror of those walls closing in, it just broke something inside of me. My parents, heartbroken, put me in a public school on the other side of town, and I never saw Sarah again. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to the bathroom. Or if maybe, just maybe, she was actually real, and the truth was about her being terrified of flying or being an architect.